What's up, White Flag fam? We are back with another great interview, and I'm here with Shari Marbois. She is the executive director, they're reorganizing, but she's the executive director for this organization called Liminal, which hosts very immersive, very interactive, and very powerful weekends to help men and women deal with the root issues of our brokenness and really put their full identity in what God already says about them. My wife has gone to Liminal. She's one of a dozen or so women at Mosaic who have seen their lives legitimately, radically impacted by the work that Shari and her team do. You hear Carl talk a lot about Crucible, like these immersive weekends that are so formative. And so the real reason I was so excited to have Shari here is because there is such soul work that gets done on a weekend. And they teach tools and language to help people continue a life of soul work. And so much of my journey here with the White Flag of adopting monastic ancient practices of Jesus, I didn't realize it at the time, but it all ties into soul work. And so today is this like beautiful collision between my obsession with, courageous surrender to Jesus, putting down our performative metrics of faith, and learning how to live in a healthy soul, and talking to Shari here about what are some of the tools that she's used that's helped people live an ongoing life of a healthy soul. So with all that being said, Shari, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I feel really honored to be asked and to get to be a part.
Awesome.
So thank you.
So Shari, give us a little bit of background of your journey, not into the construction of Liminal as an organization, but your journey into sort of this psychological, soul restorative work that you pour yourself out for more weekends than not now.
Yeah. So I grew up as a preacher's kid.
Okay.
Way back in the day, ancient times, when the parsonage, the pastor lived in the parsonage, and it was actually right on the property. So for a portion of my growing up, the church was literally in my backyard.
Ew.
And yeah, exactly. Now it's like, I get like skin crawling sometimes. But I would run through the halls of the church during the week. That was my playground. And so grew up as a preacher's kid, and then went on to Bible college, went on to seminary, worked for a mission organization. And it was probably when I was maybe in my early 30s, I really began to become aware of how broken I was. I think, if I'm honest, I lived in a lot of fear, a fear that you would see how flawed I was. And so I did all kinds of things to put a mask up, and again, really to date me, way back in the day, there was a TV show called Fantasy Island, and Tattoo would stand there and he would go, "Da plane," and Rourke would say, "Smiles, everyone, smiles," because everything's great on Fantasy Island. And so I really viewed even my Christianity, especially going to church, I just, the mantra, put the smile on when you pulled in the parking lot. Don't see that people, your marriage is a mess. You think you're really screwing up your kids. And I just got to a place of really desperation and went, okay, God, if I don't do something, one of us is not going to make it. It could be me, it could be my kids. But I knew I needed something because I had a boatload of head knowledge about God. And a lot of it didn't really connect to me really believing that God loved me, that God, made me on purpose, that, I would tell you, I would probably think that I was the one person he went, yeah, I probably messed that one up. So lived in that sense of there was something wrong with me, but couldn't really share it. Church to me was not a safe place for that. And that's my story. Church is a safe place for a lot of people, but it just wasn't for me. It was a lot about performance. And so really out of desperation, I went on a secular weekend. It was these two men who, as far as I knew, didn't have any relationship with God. It was not a Christian weekend, but I went on this weekend going, okay, God, meet me here. And I ventured a tiny bit into it. I was so afraid to be vulnerable, felt so much shame. But through this weekend event, And the work that these guys did with us, there was something that shifted in me to where some of the shame lifted. And it's almost as if I could breathe a little easier and could see God a little easier and could see myself a little easier and then could see other people a little easier. And so it was so healing for me in that respect. I wanted to keep going. And there were some other women who had done the weekend as well at different times. And we kind of banded together and started doing group work. We did not do it well in the beginning. And in the senses that we were dealing with some intense stuff and we weren't really sure how to deal with it. So we blew up our group a couple of times. But we learned some good lessons from it. But in that, for me, it became, if God could use, in some senses, the donkey to do his work, he could speak through the donkey to do something. He could use these pagan men who would out the gate tell you they didn't have a relationship with God, but the work was so redemptive. What could God do with people who had a theology that aligned with, the truth of who God is and the redemptive work of Jesus? What could God do if there were folks like that? And so I began to get my own training so that I could handle people well. Because in this work, all of us, I think, carry deep wounds. And how do we safely navigate into those wounded places so that there can be healing and a sense of freedom?
That's great.
And reintegrate, I think, how God meant us to be.
That's amazing that you went on a weekend that didn't have those the biblical narratives of redemptive work and the transforming and renewing of the mind, and yet the Spirit was alongside you kind of doing that stuff because you invited him in, like you said, God, I need you to show up. So flash forward now to or fast forward, not flash forward. I don't know what that was. Fast forward.
I was
now.
right with
I
you.
appreciate it. So fast forward now to, you're hosting Unleashed weekends, which are these, immersive experiential weekends of breakthrough where people break free from shame and find freedom. And you lead these weekends for women. I don't want to spend the majority of our time talking about liminal. I know part of the benefit of these weekends is people don't know much going into it, but as much as you, as the person who kind of protects the vision of this thing for Unleashed, what would you say to the audience about what these weekends are, both for men and women, and why they're important?
Yeah, so again, like you said, Liminal offers both men's weekends and women's weekends. And so I used to work on a church staff, and I was part of the spiritual formation team. And I used to describe this work as kind of the yin and yang of spiritual formation. There's, to me, the one side of spiritual formation, which perhaps, kind of the Dallas Willard things of how do you cultivate, Bible study, scripture memory, a prayer life, these pivotal, deep, necessary, foundational pieces of your Christian faith. Those are so important. I think spiritual formation that's one side of it. I feel like the Liminal and the weekends and the groups we run live on the other side of that, which is, I think our work is really, beneficial to people who go, okay, I know that there's something in me that I can't change, and I need to figure out what that is. Often it's, I want to stop yelling at my kids. And yet I keep yelling at my kids. Or I want to stop, maybe stop spending more money than I had planned on spending. But I can't seem to stop.
The unwanted manifestations of sin, the unwanted behaviors that you seem to be unable to control. Is what you're saying. Yeah,
it's like these rocks that keep tripping us up, and we work on them, but they're still there. And there's this, okay, so you got to dig in to go find out why. What is it in you that's got that still there for you? What's that about? And so this work is about really diving into those places. And a lot of times, I don't know, at least for me, it's scary because it's parts of me I don't like typically. I wish I wasn't angry. Yeah. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to be selfish. And yet I keep finding myself showing up in that way. And so to change it, I have to be willing to dive in and own it, that it's there in me. Mm-hmm. And so this work is a lot about taking the time and the space, that set apart liminal space, where we stop our regular world in order to give God permission to drill down into those places. And where we have a willingness to be honest about what's really going on. And in those honest times and spaces, I believe that's when Jesus goes, yes, now that you've owned it, now that you've brought it out, so to speak, into the light of Jesus can now work on it.
Yeah.
And we create those spaces, those environments, those containers, so to speak, so that people can drill down into those parts of themselves that keep tripping them up.
I think the way you framed it, even bringing in like who I jokingly call Saint Dallas, because everything Dallas Willard ever writes, I just consume so much. But you're hitting on even the way in which God brought me onto my journey, because before I could really fall in love with these practices that actually go counter to our Western predispositions, before I could get there, I had to go on a weekend of my own where like the shell and protective modes that I put on to kind of prop myself up in who I wanted to be, and all the unwanted behaviors or reactive behaviors of my life. I had to first go on a weekend to kind of shed all those things and have breakthrough. And it was only from that place of sort of coming to the end of myself and then seeing the identity Christ already gave me, only from that place could I then really step into these things. And so even as you were talking, like, oh yeah, in my own story, I had to experience something like this to really have a quiet time with God that wasn't just a quiet time as a checklist. Because for so long, it was a checklist because of my wounding as an Enneagram 7. I understand you're a 3, so you've got similar wounding as me that we all have to work on, but it is so vital that people see, the phrase I'll use in the show is, the start with Jesus begins when you come to the end of yourself. And I would even put words in your mouth a little that a liminal weekend for men or women is really you choosing to say, I'm willing to come to the end of myself and explore where God is at work in that end.
For sure.
So one thing that I would love your input on, I meet with men and women who feel like they are not weak, so they don't need to go on a weekend like this. They say, I'm a strong man, or I'm a strong woman, or my life hasn't blown up or something, I don't need to go. What would your response be to people who maybe have a tickle or a nudge that God wants to work on something that they haven't seemed to be able to address, but they don't want to be weak, or their life hasn't blown up, they maybe don't feel like they should go or they're ready to go? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think that a willingness to admit not everything is perfect in your life is a qualification for attending a weekend, and probably even for joining a group, is that you still have a growth edge. And I consistently come back to the verse, when the writer of Hebrews says, we are running a race. We are to lay aside the weight that so easily entangles us. At least from my perspective, I haven't done a deep dive into hermeneutics on the verse, but I hear that very present tense. I don't stop running the race this side of eternity, which means that I don't stop needing to lay aside the weight. So my work is never done.
Yeah.
If my work were to be finished, I would become prideful and wouldn't need God. Mm-hmm. So, the willingness to explore, okay, things are okay in my life, but I think if we're honest, there's probably always something I could find that I could be working on, that I maybe don't like about myself, or I wish I could change, or I feel shame around, or I want to do it better or differently, or love, I get stuck sometimes in how I love people. I think there's always room for growth. And so, I feel like, Brene Brown has done us such a favor.
Yeah, she really has.
In her work.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love her. I want Brene Brown to come
normalized
on my weekends.
Oh yeah, she's normalized so much of like, hey, you are not a problem if you have problems to deal with. Let's all do this together. Let's be vulnerable. So good.
Right. Well, and the truth of the matter is that vulnerability is not weakness, it's actually a sign of strength.
Come on. Yeah. So good.
And then I'm reading Kurt Thompson's book, The Soul of Shame. I've had, like, that sits on my table. I read through that.
Okay.
I was listening to a podcast that he was on a while ago, and he was mentioning that so much of healing really needs to take place in community.
Yes.
That's
great.
There's that phrase that's been around for a long time, we don't get wounded in and of ourselves. Like, it happens, in relationship.
Yes.
So healing happens in relationship.
Yep.
And so I believe that these weekends, there's something even about the community that when I speak it out loud, that's actually, there's healing that can come in that. And there's always this room for growth. So the admitting that not everything is perfect is not a sign of weakness. I believe it's actually a sign of great strength and courage.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So anyone who's listening, if you have been thinking about a immersive weekend like this, we talk about Crucible and Liminal at Mosaic. If you've thought about it and you realize, my pride has been in the way, and I'm actually ready to be strong by being vulnerable, we'll have all the resources on the episode of resources so you can learn how to sign up and all that stuff and get more information from the organization Shari leads. But so again, to collide these two worlds together, I know that great communicators typically aren't well-rounded. They focus on a couple things they're very passionate about, and it's obvious that they are that voice. That person is the identity person, or that person is the, biblical translation historicity person. And I've tried to position myself with this show to be the guy that, if anything, draws you back to these quiet, still, restful practices with Jesus, these rhythms that we see him modeling. And the ones I'm really passionate about are silence and solitude. And with you, I see silence and solitude. The judgment I make is that silence and solitude are tools of curiosity. I mean, even in my own spiritual journey, of the people who I am more willing to be silent and still now because I am less afraid of what I'll uncover. But that first step really is a step of curiosity. And without giving things away, I know that curiosity is something that you push a lot in the lives of those that you get to mentor and disciple. So can you talk for a little bit about the power of curiosity in spiritual formation and why that seems to be a tool that you use in helping people kind of break through or lean into some of the things they don't want to experience?
Yeah, a lot of people hate me for the phrase of, so why don't you just get curious about that?
I will be honest, I have heard it with animosity when people bring it up, like, oh yeah, let's get curious. And they say it almost like they're frustrated.
Yeah, I think, I know, and yes, it's said in love because I believe that awareness is half the journey. And if I can become aware of what's going on, I now have, knowledge is power. I have power, information, and I can be at point of choice. As long as I don't have awareness of what's really the hidden drivers that are like driving the bus of my life, if I'm not aware of what that is going on inside of me, I can't do anything to change it.
Yeah.
So it keeps me stuck.
Yeah, the hidden driver's language is striking me because you're right. It's like, are you the one driving this bus? Or are there heart shapers, as another therapist I've talked to before, are there heart shapers that are actually framing the way in which you live your life that you think you might be in control of, but they're actually calling the shots?
Yes, and in our work, I believe that we have different aspects of who we are, different parts of who we are. I think even when you look at the Trinity, there is God, and there's three different parts, three different aspects of God. We are told to love God with our heart, mind, soul, and strength, which are four different aspects of us. And I believe that there's these different aspects, different parts of us that are alive and well inside of us, often of the unacknowledged driver. And I also too think there's different portions in our lives where maybe we get wounded, and in situations that trigger that wounding, that part shows up. Like, I have definitely a rebellious teenager who will show up in certain situations, and I can kind of now just, I've done enough work to go, oh, look, there she is. She's driving the bus.
Wow.
But, until I got aware of that, I didn't know how to shift it. I didn't know how to bring healing and even love to that part of me that got so wounded back in the day, and how to take good care so that more adult me can be, so to speak, online in different situations.
Fascinating.
So I think that, getting curious brings us a wealth of information, but it can be scary and painful because it means I have to face myself. I have to see me.
Yeah. And I want to point out something to those listening that Shari kind of breezed through, but the driver of the bus was not a circumstance happening in her present. It was a moment of wounding and a season of wounding years ago. And so I think the encouragement you would give people as they maybe seek to journal or pray or step into a time of silence is to not look at the reactive behaviors that maybe they're not proud of in their life and think, okay, what's going on this week? But to broaden the scope that you use to look at your life and realize there's probably some splinters that got deposited in your soul early on. And that's why I really don't want to look at it, because then it's like its formation has happened under the radar, and now it feels like there's a great book that Jordan Peterson references about like the dragon in the house. And at first it only fits in the bedroom, but then it takes up the whole house. And before you know it, the house is off its foundation. And that is those moments or wounds that have gone unaddressed for a long time. So I think it's important to highlight that, though, that people don't look at just what's happened this year. A lot of it usually is much bigger than that. I think you'd agree.
Oh, for sure. And, in that curiosity about getting curious, it's like, so what is that about? A lot of times it's, what place to get curious about is, so where have I experienced a similar situation to this before in my life?
Where have I experienced a similar situation in my life? Okay, it's a good question to ask, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think if you can get curious even about the emotion that's down in there, because to me, our emotions are often the unacknowledged driver. Where did I feel this emotion before? What was the situation that was happening in my life such that emotion was going on in me? And that might give me good information about where I'm finding myself in relation to this current day event.
Fascinating. Yeah, the emotional part is something I've become increasingly passionate about from my weekend work. Even helping people, we do guided meditations about once a month on the show and we did one recently of just acknowledging what emotions are there and bringing them to God, because sometimes we will put them on a shelf because we think they're not like the holy emotions. We're not allowed to bring those to Him. And so you would advocate for kind of what we've talked about of none of these are off the table. They are part of who you are. He's not scared of them, so let's bring them up and see what they're about.
Yes, and I would actually emotions are a passion for me. I could jump on a soapbox and talk about them all day. Partly because I just believe they're so ingrained. I mean, if you look back there on my wall,
the Inside Out poster,
Inside Out movie, like I was so into that movie. Somebody from a theater got me the thing that goes in the Coke machine so I could have it lit up in my office.
Let's go.
I believe that our emotions are so attached to who we are, we can't separate them out. And I always, at least in my journey when I began, I thought, okay, I don't like these particular emotions. And I think we, as a culture, can fall into a frame of we have positive emotions and negative emotions.
Yes.
And I actually really encourage people to lift the labels off. And it's just, in some senses, really, it's just energy inside your body. But if you look to the life of Jesus, who was fully God and fully man, how did He do emotions? And so even, on weekend work and group work, we look at the life of Christ to teach us how do we do emotions, because we are made in God's image. Yeah. So if Jesus had them and He was without sin. Yeah. How could I have these emotions and also be without sin? So it's a great place to get curious even about that.
Oof. Man, lift the labels. That's a tweetable right there, Shari. That's so good. Interesting. So when you are working with somebody, whether it's on a weekend or through your own just ministry that you have, what good, I love hearing this from other people, so it's not just me saying it. What power do you see silence having in people's lives amidst our hurried, control-obsessed, manic world? How powerful of a weapon is that in the soul work that you do? And I'd love for you to just unpack that a little bit more as our audience continues to kind of grow in this and make it a part of their spiritual walk. But how formative is forcing people into silence or they don't know when it's going to be over, but just force them to get into that space. Is that a weapon you use in your work? How would you describe its power on people as we navigate our current culture?
Well, I would probably not want to frame it as a weapon. I would
that's true. That's bad.
Uh,
when it came out, I was like, it's a tool. Better.
It's a tool. It's a tool. It's an assisting measure. I think it's essential, Jonathan. Like, I just think that quieting is essential to spiritual formation, to having, I think, true relationship with God, which quieting on so many levels, quieting my interaction with social media, even quieting my conversations where I, maybe I'm not interacting as much with, just allowing myself to be present in the silence to, face myself, see myself, which is horribly scary at times, give me a way to numb out from this. And then also to, Scripture tells us the still small voice of God that can speak to us in the silence to, be a balm to our soul. And I think most of the time,
it's beautiful
to be a source of love and grace.
Yeah. In your own journey as a 3, the judgment I make about you is that was difficult, and it was probably a chaotic and even painful experience of putting down the achiever metrics that defined you and realizing you have nothing to contribute, and yet this is where God calls you to. What was that like for you?
I would say it's not how was it, it's how is it.
Come on, Shari. Come on.
No,
so good. So good.
I need to be honest, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready for this call, and I'm like, okay, how's my office? Is it clean enough? Is my hair okay? I can wake up almost on a daily basis and say, who do you need me to be today? What does the world need me to be today? And I will chameleon and perform all day long to give, so much so that I can get so distanced from the essence of who I am. I gotta say, brother, I still need to meet myself in that.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of good gifts to being a 3, and then there's some real challenges around performance. And so I don't always succeed in setting that aside. And, there are moments when days when I go, okay, I'm setting aside social media for the next hour, and something pops up in my psyche, and I'm just like, okay, what's going on Facebook? And I'm over here picking up my phone because I just want to get out.
Yes.
I just have to get me out, lift, distract, avoid. So, the gift of silence is you've got really no place to run, really, other than to God. But I think that solitude, that sense of I'm setting aside the distractions to be present, for me at least, can be incredibly painful, but so necessary to my own spiritual health.
I'm getting teary-eyed when you started talking, because I'm yes, what a dumb way to phrase the question, as if we get past the pull of culture, because I'm the vulnerability in which you answer that question was so beautiful, because it's true. And I think I even feel that tension of, I don't want people to think I have this stuff figured out. There are days, like you said, where I'm okay, no phone today. And then sure enough, my Instagram usage for the day was 2 hours or something stupid. And you're what is wrong with me? I have a podcast about this. I shouldn't be dealing with this anymore. But you're right. It is a lifelong journey.
Right.
So
can I coach you for,
Yes.
Okay. So can I invite you, Jonathan, to consider reframing even how you see yourself in that moment, to not put the judgment, and I hear that as shame of what's wrong with me.
Yes.
And instead, if you can, to reframe that for a moment and go, wonder what was going on for me. In a place of curiosity. So I wonder what that was about, that I needed to lift out of where I was. What's going on for me? Am I feeling fear? Can I bring compassion? At least this has been my journey. I feel like I have lived for a really long time with toxic shame. So if it doesn't fit for you, don't take it. But for me, one of the keys to lifting shame, even of just, I'm bad, what's wrong with me? Like that can go through my head. Sure, you're stupid. You did this again. Oh my gosh, when are you ever going to get it? The thing that helped to shift the shame for me was to bring some compassion and love and curiosity about what was going on for me in that moment. Scripture says perfect love casts out all fear.
Yeah.
And I believe that underneath a lot of what drives us is a place of fear. I don't want to sit in silence because something bubbles up and then I feel afraid of what does that mean about me, or what do people think about me, or am I a failure? And so I will eject out and numb because I really actually don't want to feel the fear. So if I can bring some love to myself and even going, well, gosh, that makes sense, that I would feel afraid. That's, all of a sudden the fear starts to dissipate and I can breathe again. And I can come back to that place of center of going, okay, I'm ready to go back in again. Because I've offered a little bit of love, which can bring, for me at least, bring some safety to go back into that place of just sitting, just to notice what is.
This is so good. I feel like everyone's going to listen in on like John's therapy session. This is so helpful. But it is, if you don't have the compassion for yourself, it does even seem like I couldn't even get curious about it, because behind that energy is instead of compassion, it was fear and judgment, and I'm not what I should be, and I'm a 7, so I'm a performer, and all those things. And it's like, I won't get curious really if I at first don't have the tool, not weapon, the tool of compassion towards myself to at least ask, why was it that I was escaping from reality? What was there about that moment that I was restless about, scared about, sad about, angry about, confused about? So good. So I do not want to blow through this. I'm making sure that I'm not pushing through an insecurity or fear of being exposed. I'm not trying to transition quickly out of this. But you said something about silence being an active battle. I have had a lot of people reach out who are trying these practices, and I commend them and I honor them. But in the silence or quiet, they feel nothing, or they feel negative things. And you talked about sometimes in that silence, you stir up negative things. I know we're lifting the labels of those emotions, but sometimes they are negative memories of pain. Can you let us into what a bad experience in silence is like for you, to maybe normalize it for other people so they realize there's not something wrong with them, that this is part of the paradoxical tension of blessing with Christ and the burden of being broken all at the same time?
Okay.
Like, what does it look like when you try to go be silent and it doesn't go well? Did you just feel nothing? Do you feel anxious? I'm not trying to get into for you to share the deep wounds of your life, but we spent a lot of time talking about why this is good, but I think people would be equally encouraged to hear someone who's done such good work still has bad days when silence just doesn't feel productive or eternal or powerful.
Okay, I had a couple of scenarios come to mind, and I want to try to address what you're asking for, because I might send us off in some tangent. So maybe I'll try to hit 2 different things and see if I can't speak to what you're asking about. I'm in a space in my life where I have the opportunity and the privilege to have quiet in the morning. I have a lot of compassion for people who have children who get up and need something. For me right now, I'm thank you, Jesus, in a space in life where all my kids are grown, and I can have a lot of quiet in the morning, and that's such a beautiful time of just quiet for me.
Yeah,
where I oftentimes I try to go outside and just sit in silence. I live in Colorado, and so I have the opportunity. I can see some of the Rocky Mountains from my backyard.
Beautiful.
And so I'll just go sit outside in silence. And some days, there's no profound thing that I hear from God, but it's just this sense of I'm very present to me, and maybe nothing bubbles up, and maybe I have to work. It's kind of like, in some senses, a sitting meditation of, okay, and I'm going to set that aside because some work stuff came up, and I'm just going to set that aside, and I'm just going to be present, just drinking my tea, hanging out with my puppy, and looking at the mountains. And, nature for me is one of my best ways to encounter God. So just getting outside and breathing is actually a really good exercise for me of coming back into a place of presentness with myself in silence, where I feel like I'm more present to grasp just even my connection with God, not necessarily hearing anything from God, but I just am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I wonder sometimes if, and you didn't say this would be, again, a place of curiosity for me, is because I can fall into this, is can I even use silence as a way to be productive? Like, I'm going to accomplish something in my time of silence. God will show me something. Something will be revealed to me. I will gain something today from that I can go, oh, I got that. Check that box. That was productive.
Oh, that hurts.
I accomplished something.
Oh, that hurts. It hurts so bad.
Does it?
It hurts so good. Yeah. No, you're hitting the nail on the head.
When perhaps, perhaps could the goal for us achievers be that my silence is just to be. And all I am is breathing. I'm being present to myself. I'm being present to God. And that's the goal.
Yeah.
So maybe that would help people who say, nothing hit me, I feel numb. Well, maybe it's making the space to just be present to whatever is without a sense of I have to feel something different or I have to hear something from God. The work might be just to shift myself to the space.
What I'm feeling convicted of is the very idea of grading the quality of my silence is exposing of my still current obsession with performing and grading myself in some way, shape, or form. Because what you're talking about is the shift to being in that space is all that we're called to do. The quality or the qualifiers we'd put on it to determine if it's productive or not, those are things that we bring into the fold. And so, because I'd say all the time on the show, oh yeah, I'll have some times of silence where I feel intimacy and closeness and affirmation. Something from scripture will pop out and it's great. And there's some times where I feel nothing, and I'll talk as if that nothing one is somehow less valuable. But the truth is, like, all I'm responsible for is showing up. And I know that, but it's like everything I'm saying right now, you're calling out. It's so good.
Well, and maybe the question would be, again, maybe to get curious about is am I still good enough? Is this still a quality time if I don't have a tangible result that came from it?
Yeah.
Is the work of solitude really about posture as opposed to outcome?
I would 100% say yes.
I don't know.
But then I get in the moment and I still have those grade givers. Henry Nouwen calls the grade givers that we seek to validate, how well we did something spiritual instead of just being.
Because if you did something well, what would that say about you?
If I did something well, that I make it about me. It says that I'm enough. Enough was like my big wound. And so I feel like I'm enough I feel like I'm enough before God to be in ministry. I feel like I'm enough to have the podcast. If I'm doing all these things and I don't feel anything, then why would I have this? Why would anyone want to listen? So all of these pillars in which I stand upon that make me feel worthy. Worthy is the big word. That make me feel worthy. I need those things and I desire those things so that I feel worthy enough to do this stuff. When part of the benefit of solitude is realizing you're bringing nothing. You're locking yourself in this room of isolation, and all of the competing narratives of your own identity are banging at the door, and you just sit there until they go away. So again, it's like stuff I get here and I'll tell people, but then when I'm in the moment, I'm trapped by my wound. And you're helping me break out of it. I'm
right there. Yeah, well, maybe some of your mindset, even for a season, might be, I'm going to step into my solitude. Can I stand in a place of worthiness, knowing I'm worthy regardless of what happens in the solitude? I'm worthy simply because I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm worthy in this, I'm showing up as I am.
Yeah.
And in that space, I am worthy.
Yeah.
And can you even breathe into that in your time of solitude? And maybe that's the gift.
That is, 100% is. I'm almost. There are. It's interesting you say this, because there are some words I say over myself. I have them hanging in my office and in my bathroom, just to remind me, like, these words are true about me. These words are not true about me, but these are. And Shari, I don't think I've read over them really in 3 months. And they're all things that aren't about what I produce. It's just about who I am as a child of God, deposited through Jesus, inheriting his righteousness. I don't earn any of it. It's just who I am. The same way, like, my daughters don't do anything for me, but when they're there, they're mine. And the conviction number 19 today is I need to make that part of that rhythm of not doing that for the purpose of now feeling like I'm right with God and I'm in the right frequency, and now I can operate out of the overflow of my spirituality so I can have a show and minister to people. But just like, no, this is what I'm called to do. Just show up. These are true about me. Breathe them in slowly. Delight in them because the Father delights in them, and the results are up to him. Like you said, it's not about outcome. It's about presence. This has gone differently than I expected, Shari, and I'm so happy. Oh, it's so good. Okay, so with people, I've benefited from a weekend, and I'm in a soul group. So I have a lot of resources to help me. And there's only a dozen or two women in our church who've gone on a women's weekend. So I don't want to ask this question just for them. But what advice would you give to someone who wants to actively pursue soul work that maybe isn't in a group yet? What rhythms or habits? Is it silence and solitude as a practice? Is it scripture meditation? What are some spiritual disciplines you would prescribe as they want to continually grow in things, whether they've gone on a weekend or not, but they just don't know where to begin? What would you say?
If they haven't gone on a weekend, I would say certainly practicing solitude. I picked up a book. Are you okay if I?
Yeah.
If I tell you about a book that has actually been really good for me, and I think hearing a little bit of who you are, you'd probably benefit from it too. You probably have heard of it. It's by Jonathan Peddle. It's called You Are Enough.
No, I don't know of it. I'm making a note right now.
This has been really cool. Somebody recommended this to me, and I absolutely just love this guy.
Okay.
He has 30 days. The subtext is learning to love yourself the way God loves you.
Wow.
And a lot of it is about unpacking how we experience God, how we experience Jesus, how we experience ourselves. And I love his stuff is not heady and long.
Yes.
Like each day is about 4 pages, maybe 3 to 4 pages typed. And then he does a meditation with you. He does and I think of it as a visualization as well. But what's really cool is that he has put all of these meditations in his voice on Spotify. I'd love you to figure out where he's from, because the way he says heart.
Heart.
But it says your heart or something I'm just are you from Canada? Are you from Australia? I don't know. But he just has a unique way of saying it. So I always put on his on Spotify, I listen to his voice as opposed to reading through it, but you can just read through the meditation, go at your own pace. But I am finding this book to be beneficial for me.
It's beautiful.
Just as my own story, one day it's about experiencing Jesus, and you envision a safe place for you. And so for me, it was this round room. I spent so much time on weekends, that kind of that room sense of, okay, God shows up here.
Yes.
And it was kind of to me, it reminded me a little bit of a yoga room. So when Jesus showed up, he had dreadlocks. So he was kind of a hippie Jesus, which really worked well for me.
Yeah.
But it's what does Jesus say to you? And Jesus invited me in this visualization, he invited me to lean back against him and just to lean on him. Like, I am a really strong, high capacity person. I get a lot of stuff done. I'm out conquering the world, for Jesus. And Jesus was like, lean back on me. And the amount of or who I let support me, I could probably count on one hand.
Wow.
It's super risky for me to let people support me. And so when Jesus invited me to let him support me and lean back on him, and then he had this phrase, which became it's the Bob Marley song. He says, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right. And I just started bawling because, life is challenging right now. This 2020 and 2021, they have kicked my personal butt.
Yeah.
And some days I really honestly don't want to get up and I don't want to get going. And so just to have this kind of place where I can, because to me, I believe God so fearfully and wonderfully made us to where we're not really supposed to disconnect our emotions from our mind, from our heart, from our soul, even our body, the book, The Body Keeps the Score, our body holds what's going on inside of us. And so to engage with God, anybody who's interested in a soul work journey, find a way to engage in God on those 4 levels: physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually.
Yeah.
I think the church has done a really good job of helping us engage with God in an intellectual way. Mm-hmm. And in that spiritual space, but I believe we really discount emotions. Yeah. We don't give credit for how we're impacted just even through life in our bodies. Like our bodies tell us really important things and we give them no credit.
Yeah.
And and so I just think that if you're interested in soul work, find a way to start connecting with God in those ways. Where can you begin to get aware of solitude is a great way to do this, of what emotion is going on inside of me. Mm-hmm. And can I make space for that even just to be acknowledged? I may not do anything about it, but just even to acknowledge, here's what's going on inside. I think your body is a lot of an indicator of what you're feeling. Mm-hmm. When I'm feeling like this, my shoulders are up at about my earlobes. I'm like, okay, I must be feeling some fear. There's some stress going on. What can I do to support myself or love myself so that some of that fear goes away? My low back hurts or my stomach or I have a headache. Like a lot of times it's about an emotional component I've not been willing to acknowledge.
It's so great.
So I think in solitude is such a great way for that to come up, but we have to be willing the willingness to see what's there.
Yeah. Ruth Haley Barton considers solitude, she calls it like the need for noticing, because in your physical presence, you come to notice what the spirit might be drawing you into. Like the fact you're only sleeping 5 hours a night and you are going to burn out. Like that's not sustainable. So even that she considers the act of you being unable to stay present, that is a sign of something that you need to tweak. So even as you were talking, that came into my head. Okay, so for someone, so that's really, really helpful. I'm going to buy that book. I'm going to start doing I do Lectio 365. It's an app that does like guided prayer meditation. It's from the 24/7 prayer movement. But it's great, but I'm always like the thing from Jonathan Puddle sounds fascinating. So I'm going to hurry out and buy that. I'll probably put it in the show notes.
I think you will like it.
Oh, I love that stuff. I love that stuff. Now, to the small crew of women who I know are going to devour this because your name's on it and it's Shari and you're a rock star, what advice would you give them as they listen and hear you talk? And it's like, I want to keep doing soul work. And I know that there's work behind the scenes of group curriculums and stuff like that. But to those who don't have access to a group right now, what would your encouragement be or challenge be?
Well, and I would say, yes, I can talk specifically to women who have done, the Liminal Unleashed weekend, but I also think for men that have done weekends, or even if you've gone on a weekend retreat or some kind of, there's men at the cross, women at the cross, there are all kinds of events.
Yes.
You come out unpacking and, shedding what no longer serves, shedding some of the lies that you had bought as truth, and really reclaiming truth that sets you free. Mm-hmm. And so I would say whether you've got a group or not, you've got probably some affirmation truth statements, that you can practice on a daily basis. We give a lot of tools on our weekends, even practicing, that line of separation where I don't take everything in, whether it's even me talking to me, I will have this sense of, nope, that's not about me. I'm not going to, you buy that today. I won't buy the shame or buy the lie, but also a lot of times people bring stuff at it to us. And so just even practicing that sense of knowing where I end and someone else begins and not absorbing things is a great tool, that it aligns with the armor of God, that shield of faith where we are believing who God says we are, not what society is, or even my spouse or my children that are sending my direction. I can sometimes have a shield with that. I go, okay, that's not about me. That's about you, which keeps me in a really centered, balanced, healthy place as opposed to tipping one way or the other. Checking in with your emotions on how you're feeling is so important, obviously, as we've talked about. We walk out of the weekend with a purpose statement of who I am in this kingdom. To practice that on a daily basis, to be honest, to going, well, am I in mission? Am I on purpose? If I'm not, what do I need to do to get myself back into alignment? So I think there's tools that come from the weekend that can certainly be implemented in regular life, whether you're in a group or not. But my hope is in particular for your Mosaic community that groups are coming your way soon. So cool. I'm excited about that.
Two last questions for you, and they may be shorter, and that's fine. But one, there are a lot of people who listen to this from our church who are leaders themselves. And you are someone who has to have their shield up a good bit because you are walking people through deep emotional pain all the time. And you know intellectually their pain, their emotion, it's not your burden to carry, it's Christ's. But what helps you stay full so that you're not having happened to you what a lot of ministers have been exposed of having happened to them in the last couple of years, where they're operating out of empty, they're operating not out of abundance, but out of desperation, and they're performing, and things go sideways. So what does Shari do to make sure that she's got her shield up and she's operating out of the overflow as she, you're constantly doing deep spiritual and emotional work? What do you do to help protect yourself from hurting your own soul as you seek to help others?
I think I practice a lot of that. I would call it centering work of, coming to a place of, Scripture talks about one of the verses we cover over the weekend, and I'm going to just butcher it in this moment, I'm sure. But it talks about that we are in God and that God is in us. Mm-hmm. And so what is super helpful for me, and this is hopefully not going to be too weird, but this actually really helps me, is sometimes, and Jonathan Puddle actually does this, which I love this about, because he says, you are in the never-ending flow of God. And so in that, again, growing up as a preacher's kid, I've heard this verse time and time and time again, is that I am in God. And I think about God being in me, but the fact that I am in God, I like to view it almost as like I'm swimming in the amniotic fluid of God. Because I know it probably sounds really weird, but God to me, God is both male and female. I know there's this masculine aspect that we really gravitate towards in Christianity, but so many examples in Scripture are maternal aspects of God.
Sure.
Where it's like a hen with chicks and, all these examples. And also, too, as women, we are made in the image of God. Yep. So there is this feminine component of God. So what helps me is helps my ego is if I offload, this is not about you. I'm just swimming inside of God. And whatever happens, I'm in God. I'm protected by God. But it's also whatever happens will be an outflow of me and Him and me. And that really helps my ego to offline to where I don't have to feel like I'm holding this whole thing. Or whatever this ministry is that I'm a part of. It's not all about me. It's not about me. And so and then to remind myself, sometimes as a leader, I look back and I go, okay, where did my ego get involved? Where did I make it about me? What was that about? What might I need to heal or shift or work on in me? And then can I also affirm that for the majority of it, I was simply doing the best I can.
Yeah.
For those of us that have the wound of not being good enough, like I was doing the best I could in the moment. And can I leave it at the cross? Can I go, okay, I was doing the best I can. If I notice something, I can work on that. But can I give myself grace? And in that moment I showed up, I can leave it. So I don't keep carrying it with me. And then I really purpose to have a couple of people in my life, like Moses, who had, I think it was Aaron and Hur, who, held his arms up. It's like, I have a couple of people in my life that I can go, okay, I'm really struggling, or I just am stumbling into a weekend event with my tank empty. Sometimes I ask them for a truth check. Help me remember what is true about me.
Yeah.
And then getting their support, being able to go, I don't know if I have what it takes, or processing stuff with them. So I know that I can offload what might get in the way so I can go back and be fully engaged with where I need to be. A bottle of red wine always helps. Maybe like bourbon. Helps me
yes,
stay grounded.
Shari. Yes.
That's how I play,
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I just think I think we carry a lot of expectations for ministry leaders to do a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to find a way to go, okay, doing a lot also means I invest in myself. I give myself a Sabbath. I take the time to be in solitude.
Yes.
Where it is ministry for me to refill my own tank. And sometimes filling my own tank is watching Netflix, where I am responsible for Netflix.
Sure.
And I get to veg out. And sometimes it's taking a walk. In other ways, it's my responsibility to find out what fills my tank in those set apart times, so that I can come back and be the leader that I want to be and that God's asked me to be.
That's so good. It is that idea of Jesus, the more in demand he became, the more he withdrew to be with the Father, and realizing that is, if you want to be a good shepherd of the spiritual health of others, you must be taking care of yourself first, because at the end of the day, you will feel like you're doing more for people, but you're actually going to have a shorter influence, a shorter impact, because you're not going to be able to finish the race. The ongoing language, the active verb tense of race, like you talked about in the author of Hebrews. So, Shari, I am so excited for people to listen to this. This is so fun for me. I can't wait to text my friends who know you and just be like, I got Shari'd. It was brilliant. It was everything you said it would be. But
thank you, Jonathan.
How can our people pray for you? How can they support the organization? Last little bit for them here before we sign off.
I think you could just, if you've been on a weekend and you've experienced me or Chris, you could just keep praying for us. I feel like we are in some important days of really solidifying this organization that I believe God can use to heal lots of people. Pray that we have wisdom, and that, we're kind of in this place of, are we sustainable? Can we be sustainable? So we're still trying to work that out, that we would just have wisdom on how best to go about that.
Great.
And then if you've attended a weekend, Chris has a great offer for men. If you've been on a Crucible weekend, you can come and staff one of his weekends. He gives you a little different experience where you get, has he put some new things in to the, sorry, I'm going to give a plug.
You're fine. I want the plug.
What's cool is that we got to build our weekends in the same space. So we share similar exercises on the men's and the women's weekend, which is, I think, a beautiful gift to people who are in relationship, to where you can come back and you can say, hey, in this exercise, this is what I discovered about myself. What'd you learn about you?
Yeah.
That is a really cool thing. And so the way he has, built the Unknown weekend with these new exercises, they're so powerful. He gives men who have, let's say, gone on Crucible, who would like to come and staff a an unknown weekend, the opportunity to have some of that experience of getting those new exercises for themselves while they're also in a staffing experience.
Cool. That is cool.
And so, so I would encourage men to come on the weekend, because there's some really neat things that he's put into the weekend that are really profound.
Cool.
So attending a weekend, coming back to staff a weekend.
Great.
Those are, many times you grow more on that side. So
yeah, it is interesting how I've staffed one weekend so far with Crucible, and I thought it was different, but emotionally just as draining, just as exhausting, just as fulfilling. And yeah, I learned something very formative and new that I did not go in expecting. So I would echo all of that. Shari, I'm so, so grateful for the work you do. My marriage is better. My wife is healthier. I'm healthier. So many people in our church are standing on a solid foundation of what God says about us because of the work that you do. I'm getting emotional talking about it. Thank you. And we'll let you know when the episode gets published. But in the meantime, we'll be praying for you and knowing that you've got a bunch of people cheering for you here. And I will definitely want to reach out again sometime and talk.
Awesome. Well, it was a delight to get to meet you. And maybe sometime, hopefully next year I'll be heading to Maryland. I can meet you in person. Thank you for wanting to talk. It was an honor.